A discutat foarte mult despre Afganistan pentru că problemele care rezultă de acolo vor afecta lumea pe termen lung. Pakistanul a pendulat mereu între Statele Unite și talibani și sunt încă foarte multe întrebări la care se caută răspuns. Are sau nu această țară influență asupra noului regim de la Kabul? Vorbim cu Safdar Sial, cercetător analist la Institutul pentru Pace din Pakistan, despre una din cele mai complicate și prea puțin cunoscute relații de pe harta lumii. Sunt Cristina Cileacu, începe Pașaport Diplomatic. Safdar Sial, researcher analyst for Pakistani Institute for Peace Studies. Welcome to Diplomatic Passport.
Thank you.
Au talibanii prieteni? Nu este răspunsul cel mai bine argumentat. Talibanii au interese și știu să și le negocieze foarte bine. Moneda pe care o oferă la schimb este, în cele mai multe cazuri, violența, dar au și alte avantaje pe care le folosesc ca să obțină ce își doresc. Prezența grupării la conducerea Afganistanului ridică probleme mari, nu doar pentru populația afgană, dar și pentru fiecare vecin al țării. Nimeni nu se simte comod cu talibanii la putere, pentru că nimeni nu are de fapt încredere în ei.
Safdar, Pakistan is a country that helped both American in their fights with terrorism in Afghanistan, but also Taliban in reaching back the power of the country. How is Pakistan seeing right now the situation in Afghanistan?
Pakistan has contributed a lot, you said very right, in bringing the Taliban to the negotiation table. And that was the international community even acknowledged that efforts from Pakistani side. And after the Doha peace agreement, and there was this acknowledgement even from most of the countries who are allied with the US, including the NATO countries. And Pakistan at the moment, I think, is feeling somewhat cautious about the situation. Because although the Taliban has taken on the government, but still there are so many fears and concerns inside Pakistan because the situation in Afghanistan so far is very fluid. So we don't know which direction the formation of the government will take place, and secondly, how the security of the Afghanistan will be ensured, especially after this attack on the Kabul airports. So Pakistan has, I think, this feeling as well that the situation can turn bad for Pakistan if the insecurity and violence grips the country, I mean Afghanistan, then it will have very severe implications for Pakistan. And those implications are not only in terms of security, but also political as well as economic.
Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan este varianta pakistaneză a talibanilor din Afganistan. Gruparea teroristă și-a intensificat activitățile și înrolează tot mai mulți adepți, imediat după ce trupele aliate au pierdut Kabulul, tocmai pentru a profita de moment. Iar acest lucru nu are cum să fie privit cu ochii buni de puterea de la Islamabad, pentru că scopul acestei organizații este declanșarea jihadului în Pakistan.
If you have to describe the relationship between Pakistan and Talibans, how would you describe it?
Yes, see, there is an international discourse from the very beginning that Pakistan has a lot of influence on the Afghan Taliban. But if we have some retrospective analysis going back to the Soviet-Afghan war, we know very well after that this militant landscape of Afghanistan that emerged after that situation. And Taliban were basically one of those militant actors which emerged from that situation. And Pakistan has been trying to achieve some sort of peace and stability inside Afghanistan, but we should also not forget that Pakistan has very legitimate concerns inside Afghanistan, as I mentioned earlier. Those are related to security, politics, as well as Pashtun nationalism and trade and economy, that Pakistan is trying to be connected in regional connectivity frameworks. Those are initiated by China. So gradually, if I try to brief that Pakistan doesn't have that sort of influence currently on the Afghan Taliban, which usually it used to have. And there are many factors for that. So one thing, let me start with if Pakistan, as the international community and media have been highlighting, has this much influence on the Taliban, why they are still reluctant to act against the TTP, that is the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and that has been bleeding Pakistan since 2007. So similarly, when recently I was reading some analysis and some statements from the Afghan Taliban, so they are not showing some sort of attitude or behavior that would say that, okay, they are just like acting on behalf of Pakistan. They even said that the TTP is the problem of Pakistan. So still they are not willing to go against the TTP, which many describe as, you can say, a strategic asset of the Afghan Taliban. So you see, there should be some tactical adjustments and marriages of convenience, you can say, between Pakistan and Taliban. But when it comes to the ideological and strategic calculations, Taliban are very clever. They know very well what are their interests and how they would like to preserve their interest in Afghanistan and the region. I think they are far ahead.
Serviciile secrete pakistaneze au fost constant acuzate că fac un joc dublu. Pe de o parte păstrează legătura cu jihadiștii, pe de altă parte sunt implicate în lupta împotriva lor. Provincia Balochistan din estul Pakistanului este o regiune cunoscută pentru prezența grupărilor teroriste, care profită atât de terenul deosebit de accidentat, cât și de granița comună cu Afganistanul pentru a-și derula activitățile. Ținta lor preferată sunt chiar instituțiile de securitate pakistaneze.
We'll get back to what you said when it comes to losing the influence over the Taliban, but my question is, since you mentioned the TTP, the Taliban are based in Quetta in Pakistani Balochistan. From there, them together with members of Al-Qaeda, also with members of Haqqani wing, are crossing at will from Pakistan in Afghanistan and the other way around. What does it mean for the security of your country and for the security of the region?
See, let me clarify this idea that the Taliban are operating from Quetta inside Pakistan, because this is also old narrative. Things have changed so drastically in the recent past. If we see in the last 2 years or so, the Taliban have been frequent travelers to the world capitals, from Moscow to Oslo, from Beijing to Tashkent, and from Pakistan to Doha. So the international community has given them such a recognition, and now they are based inside Afghanistan. This border, basically, Pakistan has 2 provinces, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. And these both provinces have a history of conflict and militant violence. And in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, we know this is be it the Afghan Taliban, be it the Pakistani Taliban, this is the border that is shared and that is used for cross-border infiltration from both sides, as you mentioned. And similarly, if we go to the Balochistan, there is a nationalist insurgency going on there. Its 4th phase is currently underway. And many of the Baloch insurgent leaders have taken shelter inside Afghanistan. So there is a discourse going on inside Pakistan that what will happen to these militant leaders and commanders of TTP and also of the Baloch insurgent groups who are inside Afghanistan. But as the situation is changing there, what will happen to them? And these all developments will have certainly will have some consequences for Pakistan.
Tahaffuz is this nationalist movement that is quite active in Pakistan, fighting and being the supporter of the Pashtun population of your country. Does the new power in Kabul, the power of Taliban, has a meaning when it comes to the Pakistani national movement?
Yes, see, this is also linked to historical sensitivity of Pakistan. Because if we go back 3-4 decades, since then we see that there was this greater Pashtunistan movement. And Pakistan doesn't want any Pashtun nationalist movement re-emerge along the border, either inside Pakistan or in Afghanistan. Because that will mean the similar, some separatist tendencies among the Pashtun faction. So this is very, very much, you can say, linked to historical sensitivity. But I don't say that this Pashtun Hafiz movement is trying to revive that historical movement. This is basically social movement. There are some legitimate concerns of the Pashtun community along the borders because due to the terrorist violence and then the military operations that cause so huge displacements, internal displacements within these regions. So there are so many people who left their native towns, homelands, and then the infrastructure, economic infrastructure, schools, their businesses, all those things, they were damaged due to the conflict. So they are just saying that rehabilitate and give some infrastructure, schools, all those facilities which have suffered due to the conflict.
Mulahul Hibatullah Akhundzada, conducătorul taliban care a rămas în umbră până acum, va conduce noul guvern de la Kabul. El este un fel de lider suprem pe modelul guvernului din Iran, iar sub el vor lucra un președinte și un premier. Talibanii încep deci să se ocupe de organizarea statului, dar acest lucru deranjează grupările radicale care consideră că s-a abandonat calea jihadului. Provocările pe care chiar talibanii le vor avea cu terorismul sunt consistente.
If we turn to Afghanistan, we see that Taliban are being challenged, let's say, by other terrorist organizations. In the same time, they are struggling to form a government. We have on the other side the Afghan population that is scared by the Taliban regime and want to leave the country. Let's say it's a sort of civil war because it's not yet a complete civil war. What expectations are in the region? What is the Pakistani expecting from these two conditions, the terrorist attacks and the migration of the population of Afghanistan?
Yes, I think all the countries in the region and beyond, they want peace and stability inside Afghanistan, because that is something that has a lot to do with the regional peace, connectivity and economic and trade progress. So this is one thing I think where all the countries in the neighborhood and beyond, they have sort of consensus. Secondly, no one wants that insecurity and violence inside Afghanistan, or you said the civil war, if that happen, because it will travel to different directions. And Central Asian states, there are some militant groups there, some of them are even in Afghanistan, and Russia wouldn't like those groups to get strengthened position and emboldenment of other groups. Similarly, Chinese are interested in countering the Uyghur militants who are threatening the Xinjiang province that has a small border with Afghanistan. And about Pakistan, I already mentioned that there are so many militant groups who can be emboldened and they can take some sort of, because always there is some cascading effect of the Afghan situation inside Pakistan. Similarly, Iran wouldn't like some sort of turmoil and civil war at its border. So all the countries in the region, because they know that their security and their economy and their political situation is hugely dependent on the situation inside Afghanistan. And as you mentioned, different terrorist groups inside Afghanistan. So basically that will be a huge challenge for Taliban themselves. As we saw the Kabul attacks by the ISIS Khorasan chapter. So they will try to strengthen their position, because 1 year before everyone was saying that the ISIS has been defeated inside Afghanistan. But there are also reports that from the last year, since May, if I am true, they had been strengthening their position in Kabul after being defeated in Nangarhar and Kunar. So there are also reports that some disgruntled members of even Haqqani networks or other militant groups could join ISIS in the future when they will feel that the Afghan Taliban have taken compromised position. They have left their original agenda of establishing Islamic order through jihad. So this is, you can say, something that is very common among militant groups. When some members feel that their parent organization is deviating, as they perceive, from the original goal of jihad, they want to join some more violent groups. So this tendency will force many members of different groups, including the Afghan Taliban, to join ISIS. So we cannot say that ISIS has been fully defeated, because they are in the process to strengthen and regroup in Kabul, and they will continue to do so. Similarly, the Central Asian militant groups, many of them threaten even China, East Turkestan Islamic Party, and then another international group, the Al-Qaeda, because Al-Qaeda had gone, you can say, underground in the way they kept low profile just to facilitate the Afghan Taliban's political reconciliation with the US and the other countries in the world. So they didn't want to create any problem for the Taliban. But that doesn't mean that they are defeated or they're eliminated, or they have moved their members and infrastructure fully or completely elsewhere. So as I see, the infighting between different terrorist and militant groups in Afghanistan will continue. The situation is not solved. Similarly, the conflict between the Taliban and the other Afghan ethno-nationalist faction groups, that will also continue, because so far we don't know what shape the new government in Afghanistan will take, how the Taliban, as they are saying that they will form inclusive government, but we don't know what construction of that government will be and what modus operandi of that government will be.
Terorismul este și mai greu de combătut. De când Statele Unite și aliații s-au retras din Afganistan, este dificil de măsurat gradul de influență pe care serviciile de inteligență ale statelor din zonă le au asupra jihadiștilor din Afganistan, chiar dacă legăturile dintre tabere sunt vechi. Un lucru este cert, presiunea pe care prezența vestului o punea pe grupările teroriste nu poate fi replicată de nimeni.
The Pakistani intelligence service are well known for being in charge, let's say, with the Taliban since the appearance of the group in the middle of the 90s. If we make a scenario, can we see how the ISI will evolve further on into working with Taliban?
Yes, as I said earlier, that's not possible because there are so huge security implications of that. See, Taliban have been placed in Kabul due to the international community's support. As I said earlier, that in the last 2 years, Taliban have been traveling to different world capitals. So international community maybe thought that this is the last hope and option left to politically reconcile with the Taliban. But Pakistan knows very well, and it has learned this lesson, that whenever some ideological movement strengthens at its borders, that has huge implications for Pakistan. Because Pakistan's own militant landscape is so diverse. There are so many religiously inspired militant groups, extremist groups, that if they will see, okay, one ideological movement in our neighborhood has become so powerful and has gone out of control of the international community, they are unwilling to even compromise with any framework or platform in the world. So this can just encourage them to do a similar copycat in their own country, as we saw when it happened after 9/11 US invasion. Until 2004, there had been so many militant groups inside Pakistan, and they were all encouraged by the developments inside Afghanistan.
Safdar, you know very well both Pakistan is your country, of course, but you also know very well Romania. How do you see the implication of what's happening in Afghanistan, so far away from us, here in Romania?
Well, I will say that first of all it is linked to this refugee issue, because as I was reading today the report from the UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees. So they are expecting that 500,000 more Afghans are willing to leave Afghanistan in near future, in the coming weeks. So that means many of them would also travel through Europe, including the Eastern Europe, through Turkey, because Turkey is very close to these countries, Bulgaria, Romania, and other in your neighborhood. So maybe after those countries they will be willing to go further, but these are the transit states from where they take the further routes. So it is very tricky because we don't know that these people, some of the people in these refugees could also be ideological motivated. They have their own religious, ideological and cultural sensitivities, and when they're exposed to some new culture, some new socio-cultural environment and setting, so that is very much new for them. So when they don't know, any time their sensitivities, religious sensitivities, cultural sensitivity can be activated.
Safdar Sial, thank you so much for this interview.
My pleasure.
Atât pentru astăzi, dar rămânem în continuare online pe pagina de Facebook a emisiunii și pe contul nostru de Twitter. Revenim cu subiecte noi din lumea diplomației și a politicii externe, vineri de la 11:30 și reluare sâmbătă de la 22:30. La revedere!